In May 1945, as Germany burned and the Third Reich collapsed, one British officer made a choice that defied hatred and history. Major Brian Urquhart stood between Soviet soldiers seeking revenge and the Nazis they wanted dead. He didn't agree with them, he didn't forgive them, but he protected them. This is the story of the British officer who saved Nazis. The British officer who saved Nazis. The Lübeck Dilemma. Chapter 1. The End of the War. By early May 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. Berlin had fallen. Hitler was dead. The Allies advanced from the west, the Soviets from the east. Amid the chaos, tens of thousands of German soldiers and civilians fled west, desperate to surrender to the British or Americans, fearing Soviet revenge. Near the German city of Lübeck, British Major Brian Urquhart, just 26 years old, led a reconnaissance unit of the 1st Airborne Division. His orders: secure surrender zones and prevent civilian massacres. But what he found there would test every moral code of war. Urquhart's men reached the outskirts of Lübeck and stumbled onto chaos. Thousands of people filled the roads, German civilians, freed concentration camp prisoners, and captured Nazi soldiers, including SS officers. Many were wounded, starving, or dying of disease. Behind them, the Soviet army was closing in, with orders to execute any Nazi personnel found in the area. British soldiers watched as panicked Germans begged for mercy, not from Soviets, but from them. Urquhart knew the Soviets had lost millions of their own people to Nazi atrocities. Their revenge was understandable. But what he saw coming was not justice. It was slaughter. Chapter 3. The Moral Line. When Soviet troops demanded access to execute SS prisoners, Urquhart refused. He ordered his men to protect all prisoners, regardless of rank, allegiance, or guilt, until formal surrender agreements were signed. One Soviet officer shouted, "These men murdered our families." Urquhart replied, "Maybe they did, but now they are prisoners of war, and we will not murder them." His men formed defensive lines around captured Nazis, using British rifles not to kill, but to prevent killing. It was a moment few talk about, British soldiers defending Nazis from vengeance. But for Urquhart, it wasn't about mercy for the enemy. It was about protecting the last fragments of humanity in a world gone mad. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Consequences. In the days that followed, Lübeck became a fragile island of order amid chaos. Urquhart negotiated tense standoffs between Soviet and British officers, often without direct authorization. His actions likely prevented mass executions of German POWs and civilians. When questioned later, Urquhart simply said, "We had to decide what kind of world we were going to build next." That same moral courage defined his later career. He went on to help found the United Nations peacekeeping forces, serving under Secretary-General Dag Hammarskjöld, dedicated to preventing wars rather than winning them. Archival photos: UN peacekeepers, Hammarskjöld, Urquhart in the field. Chapter 5. Legacy. Brian Urquhart's story rarely appears in war movies. He never wrote it as a tale of heroism, but as a warning. He believed that real victory isn't in defeating the enemy, but in not becoming them. In his memoir, A Life in Peace and War, he reflected, "The test of civilization is not how we treat our friends, but how we treat our enemies." In that moment at Lübeck, he proved it. Final line. A young British officer faced history's greatest evil and chose justice over vengeance. Major Brian Urquhart saved Nazis to save humanity. For more untold stories of war and morality, subscribe to the channel. For more untold stories of war and morality, subscribe to the channel.